I invite you to please stand as you are able as we hear now the words of Jesus as he comes to us in our gospel reading, taken from the 6th chapter of the book of John. Jesus said, "This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your ancestors ate manna and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever." He said this while teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. On hearing it, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life, the flesh counts for nothing. The words that I have spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and who would betray him. So he went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled them." And from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Jesus then asked the 12, "Do you not want to leave too, do you?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. So one of the things that I learned this morning about live streaming a service at 8:15 is that there are some people who might watch it and try to use your sermon material against you. So did Carl tell a story about a farmer and his mule? Okay, good. Then I'm not going to change the mule's name. Not going to change the mule's name. Words are important. Words are very important. Farmer Joe decided that his injuries from an accident that he was in were severe enough that he decided to sue the trucking company that was responsible for the accident. And so when they went on trial, the trucking company's fancy lawyer got up there and said, "Mr. Joe, is it true that at the scene of the accident you said that you were fine?" And Farmer Joe just kind of said, "Well, let me tell you what happened. I just loaded my favorite mule, Bessie, into the..." And the lawyer stopped him and said, No. Just please answer the question simply. Is it true that you told the state trooper who was on the scene that you were fine?" And Farmer Joe responded again, "Well, I just got Bessie into the trailer and I was driving down the road," and the lawyer interrupted again. But this time he turned to the judge and he said, "Judge, I'm trying to establish the fact that at the scene of this accident, this man told the highway patrolman on the scene that he was just fine. And now, several weeks after the accident, he's trying to sue my client. I believe he's a fraud. Please tell him to simply answer the question." Well, the judge at that time was a little intrigued. So he said, "No, I'm not going to grant that. I'm kind of interested in this farmer's favorite mule. Farmer Joe, please tell your story." So Farmer Joe said, "Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that." So as I was saying, the other day I had loaded up Bessie, my favorite mule, into the trailer, and we got the truck. We were driving down the road, and we came to this intersection, and this truck and trailer ran through the stop sign, hit my truck broadside. Bessie got thrown on one side of the ditch. I got thrown into the other. And I was hurt really bad, but I couldn't move. And even though I heard Bessie moaning and groaning in the other ditch, I knew she was in bad shape. And all of a sudden I hear a highway patrol come up, and he hears Bessie moaning and groaning in the other ditch, so he goes and checks on her first. And apparently he looked at her, it was so bad he took his gun out and he shot her right between the eyes. So then he walks over to me with his gun in his hand, and he said, "Sir, your mule was in such bad shape I had to put her out of his misery. How are you feeling?" Words are important, y'all. They're very important. And the thing is, if we're not careful with how we use them and understand them, then chaos ensues. In fact, I would actually argue that one of the problems we face in society today is that we're never quite sure what someone may or may not mean when they say something. There's this constant churning of our language that sometimes leaves us scratching our heads trying to understand each other. And because sometimes we have very different definitions of words, we fail miserably to communicate, to understand, and to agree on basic things. And you see, this can actually be really, really problematic if we believe that God has spoken to us and if we believe that God still speaks. Can we understand what God says? And can we grasp His word in the midst of the murkiness of our language? Let's pray about that. Gracious God, you have spoken to us through the prophets, and in these last days you have spoken to us through your Son. Give us wisdom and discernment to truly hear His word to us, that we may understand it, and that we may obtain the things that He promises. And it is in His name, in the name of Jesus, that we pray. Amen. Now, I'm going to ask you to put your thinking cap on for a little bit, because I'm going to do some stuff that might be a little bit heady. I'm going to try to not be too terribly dense, because what I'm about to lay out for you, I think, is a pretty big problem that we are dealing with in our society these days. I think it's one of the reasons that we continue to see more and more divisiveness between people, and it's because we don't communicate well with each other. We have a communication problem. You see, several decades ago, this kind of started in an academic setting. And there were some folks who got their heads together and they came up with a bright idea that said, words have no inherent meaning. What do I mean by that? Well, let me illustrate it for you this way. So let's say I look at you and I say, that car is cool. What do I mean by cool? Do I mean that it's like a sports car and it looks really fancy? Do I mean that the air conditioning system works really, really good? And it's a great place to spend a hot Texas day? Do I mean that it's a very popular model and a lot of people are buying it? Any one of those three understandings could work and work very, very well. Therefore, the word cool does not have an inherent meaning. Its meaning is supplied by those of us who are hearing the word and who are speaking it. Are you with me with that? Did you get that? The other service actually nodded their heads. Are you with me? Okay, thank you. And if you're not, it's all right. I'm going to keep pressing forward. I'll let you to think about it. I've got to keep going through the sermon to make my point. But since words have no inherent meaning, the way these academics took this is they started saying, since words have no inherent meaning, we can make words mean whatever we want them to mean. And I think that has caused some chaos. How? Well, let me give you this example. One of the buzzwords that is going around our society today is racism, right? And we hear people talk about racism all the time. The general understanding and definition of the word racism is that when you look at another person of another skin color, you look at them with prejudice because you believe that your skin color gives a sense of moral superiority over them. That's racism. That's the way many of us understand it. However, in the 1970s, there was an academic that wrote a paper that gave a very different definition to the word racism. That academic said that racism is prejudice with power. Therefore, there are certain people who can be prejudiced, but they're not racist because they have no power. Now, that definition started in an academic paper. There were other academics who latched onto it and began teaching their students that, and then that trickled into society. So you need to know that this definition of racism is not an organic definition that originated within the culture. It came from the academy and then filtered into the national discourse. So now, oftentimes you will get two people who will talk about racism, but they will start disagreeing with one another absolutely vehemently. Why? Because they have two very different definitions of the word. You see that? Are you with me still? You understand how that is happening? And then, that's a problem. That's a real problem, because when you infuse words with your own meaning, regardless of the more accepted meaning, and then you try to engage in conversation, you end up with a failure to understand, a failure to communicate, and a failure to agree upon anything. You end up with chaos. And so you end up with politicians, celebrities, pastors, other folks saying something, and then you have people who spin it, and they say, well, what you really said was this. You see the problem? You see the problem, and you see how that happens in our society today. And I think this is one of those places where we as Christians need to enter into this discourse because we have something to say to this. We have something very important to say to this because we have given this problem a lot of thought throughout our history. And why have we given it a lot of thought? Because we have seen how biblical texts have been manipulated and used wrongly. We have seen how words and phrases have been taken out of context, out of the scripture, and used and abused by preachers and others who try to prove a particular point, who try to prove their own ideology and agendas by these particular things. And I got an example for you on that. It's an old story. It's an old story about this pastor who did not like women who wore their hair in top knots. Do women still wear their hair in top knots today? Elizabeth has one. She's got one right there. But apparently this was a thing. It was really, really popular, and this pastor didn't like him at all. So he spent. No, that's not a bun. That's it's kind of tied in a knot. But anyways, this was a style, and this pastor didn't like him. So he got up and he preached one sermon, his entire sermon one Sunday, on how these things were sinful and how women should not wear them. So after worship, this woman confronted him, and of course she was wearing a top knot, and she said, "Pastor, there is nowhere in the Bible where it says women cannot wear a top knot." And the preacher looked at it and says, "No, I'm sorry, ma'am, there sure is. If you look in Matthew chapter 24, verse 17, it says, 'Let he who is on the house top knot come down.'" It's corny. I know it is, but it's not far from how certain people have taken the Bible and used it and abused it. And so we, as theologians and pastors, have come through and thought this through and have said this. In order to understand what someone has said, in order to understand what the Bible has said and says, we need to understand what the writer intends. We need to understand as best as we possibly can through the eyes of the one who is speaking. We are not at liberty to take the Bible. We are not at liberty to take one another's comments and put our own meanings upon them, our own understandings upon them. We are to study diligently to understand those words as written, as spoken by those who said them. So in other words, words may not have inherent meaning, but the people who spoke them and the people who wrote them sure had an understanding of their meaning when they spoke or said them. And our gospel lesson today shows why this is really, really important. And as we look at this text, we see Jesus say something quite strange. I'm going to begin a few verses earlier than what I read. I'm going to begin in verse 56 to kind of give you the full context. Because in verse 56, Jesus says this, "Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate and they died, but the one who eats this bread will live forever." What does Jesus mean by that? And you see, on the one hand, we in the church have taken this and this language to refer to the Lord's Supper. And I'm not going to dispute that because I think there's very much truth to that. However, we also have to remember that at the time Jesus spoke these words, he hadn't instituted the Lord's Supper yet. And while he may have been thinking about this as a future event, I think there's a lot more that is going on. And I think that way because we are told what the folks around him said. The folks, after they heard Jesus say this, said, "This teaching is difficult. Who can accept it?" Now again, going back to the point I made earlier, we need to try to understand what folks were saying through their eyes. So we look at this statement, "This teaching is difficult," and we look at that word difficult. The Greek word that is translated difficult here has an underlying connotation. It actually conveys a sense of offense. The teaching is difficult because it's offensive. Why is it offensive? And first off, we need to know that ancient people weren't stupid, y'all. Okay, sometimes people think that ancient people were dumb. They're not stupid. They recognize that Jesus was talking metaphorically here. It's a metaphor. Jesus wasn't talking about them being cannibals and actually eating his flesh and drinking his blood. There was a metaphor going on, and the metaphor was highly expensive. Offensive, not expensive. It was expensive. It cost him his life later, but it was really offensive at the time. Why? Here's why. Lurking in the background is Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. And I know you all know it and have it memorized, so I don't need to read it, right? What does it read? Deuteronomy 8:3 reads this. He, God, humbled you by letting you hunger and then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Jesus is saying, feast on me and my word. He is unequivocally saying, the Lord, you know the Lord? That's me. My words bring life. And that was offensive. But Jesus didn't back down. In fact, Jesus doubled down. He started turning the screw a little tighter. And the way he did that, he looked at him and he said, so, okay, you're offended by this? So what would you do if you saw the Son of Man, which is him, if you saw the Son of Man ascending back up to where he was from? So Jesus is saying, okay, if you saw me ascend back unto heaven, what would you think then? Would you be offended still? Or would you acknowledge then that I am who I say I am? And we find out that the people were not ready to do that. They couldn't do that. They weren't interested in affirming that Jesus was the Lord. They wanted to hold on to their own beliefs and thoughts and ideas. They thought they were good enough as they were. They didn't think they needed a Savior. They believed their own fleshy works could get them where they think they needed to go. But then Jesus dispels that notion. He says the flesh is useless. It's the Spirit that gives life. And the words that I speak are spirit and life. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And then Jesus turns the screw again. He hits him hard. And he says, for this reason, I've told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father. You can't even follow Jesus unless God has first placed it in your heart. So as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that no one can say that Jesus is Lord except by the power of the Holy Spirit. It's why Martin Luther wrote in the explanation to the third article of the Apostles' Creed that I cannot by my own reason or strength come to Jesus or believe in him, but it is the Holy Spirit that calls me through the gospel, enlightens me with his gifts, and sanctifies and preserves me in the true faith. In other words, it's all sheer grace. It's all sheer grace. There is nothing we can do on our own part to come to Jesus Christ and experience salvation through him. Our works don't save us. Our words don't save us. We cannot even come to Jesus Christ and go, God's Spirit works and changes our hearts and brings us to saving faith. And all of those pills were much too much for those folks to swallow. They could not swallow the fact that Jesus was the Lord. They could not swallow the fact that their works and efforts were nothing, and they could not swallow the teaching that they could not follow Jesus unless God had placed it on them. It was too much. So many walked away. And we shouldn't be surprised at this. We shouldn't. It's a lot for a human heart or a human mind to take in. I mean, even now, many reject that Jesus is the Lord. Even now, many would rather rely on themselves and their goodness for salvation. Even now, many believe that they have the capability of believing in Jesus on their own accord, even without the help of the Holy Spirit. And when they're faced with this teaching, they're more than happy to walk away from the church that teaches this, to walk away from Christianity to a religion of their own making, and to walk away satisfied with their own righteousness, and they're unwilling to confront the true depth of their sin. And here's the thing, Jesus lets them go. You look at the text, Jesus doesn't chase them down. Jesus lets them go. That doesn't mean he didn't want them following him. It doesn't mean that he didn't have a deep love of them and desire for them to be in that saving relationship with him. But he loves them enough to let them go. And in the midst of his disappointment, he turns to the 12. He turns to those who are closest to him, who he had handpicked, and he said, hey, you want to go too? And St. Peter stands up and he makes a confession. He confesses the faith of the church. He says, Lord, remember Deuteronomy 8:3, Lord, you are God. Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Words are important. And in this case, their importance is above and beyond anything that we could ever imagine. They bring eternal life. Jesus brings eternal life by sheer grace, by his death, by his resurrection. And these words are nothing to trifle with. And while they may not have inherent meaning, Jesus has infused them with eternal meaning, with eternal truth. Therefore, not only may we listen to them, may we feast upon them. Amen.